Welcome to the module, an overview of Batterer intervention programs. This is the second module in a two-part series focused on the co-occurrence of intimate partner violence and child maltreatment. My name is Jacob Otis, and I'm a PhD student in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. I am presenting this module based on a project being conducted by Dr. Lynette Renner, who is a professor in the School of Social Work, and Amy Dorman, who is also a PhD student in the School of Social Work. These are the four learning objectives for this module. By completing this module, participants should be able to 1. Understand the history, goals, and structures of Batterer intervention programs, or BIPs. 2. Recognize the central role of BIPs in the child welfare interventions. 3. Identify the potential of BIPs in family systems change, and identify 2 BIP examples in Minnesota. And 4. Identify resources connected to BIPs. Throughout this module, I will use the term intimate partner violence, or IPV. IPV is defined by the CDC as abuse or aggression that can take the form of physical, sexual, psychological violence, and/or stalking, and occurs within a romantic relationship. Intimate partners can be current or former partners. It is important to note that this definition may vary from state statute definitions. Other forms of intimate partner violence include verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and coercive control. In the US, it is estimated that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. The consequences of IPV are vast, including a variety of physical, mental health, and financial vulnerabilities. IPV has negative outcomes for the individual, family, and community, and at a societal level, IPV has economic costs of $3.6 trillion. It is important to understand that people of all gender identities experience IPV, and that people of all gender identities use IPV. However, it is more often reported that men use violence against women, and as such, this will be the language used in the majority of this module. Now we will briefly discuss some risk factors related to IPV. A systematic review by Capaldi et al. In 2012 found a number of risk factors or variables that may indicate a higher likelihood of an individual using IPV in their relationships. And these include exposure to intimate partner violence. Children who are exposed to violence between adults in their household may internalize violence as an acceptable behavior to use in relationships. Victim of child abuse. All forms of child maltreatment are associated with an increased use of violence in adult relationships. Age, adolescence, and young adulthood. Younger persons have a higher likelihood of using violence in relationships, with violence peaking in the early 20s and desisting over time. Acculturation stress. Researchers suggest that acculturation stress may increase the use of violence in relationship. A reduced ability to manage anger. An inability to handle stress and substance use have all been associated with an increased use of IPV. And lastly, victim depression has also been linked with higher levels of IPV in households. Research on the association between childhood maltreatment and IPV has drawn clear connections. In one study, 75% of men who used IPV reported a history of child maltreatment. Men who experienced child maltreatment during their childhood are nearly 3 times more likely to use violence in their adult relationships. Researchers have also shown a connection between child maltreatment leading to things like emotional dysregulation into adulthood, which increase the likelihood of using IPV in adult relationships. Men who had childhood experiences of being maltreated have also been found to be more likely to maltreat their own children, and/or if they witnessed IPV, they were similarly more likely to use IPV in their adulthood. Alongside physical maltreatment in childhood predicting physical IPV as an adult, researchers have also found that emotional maltreatment as a child can also increase the risk of physical IPV use as an adult. In other words, violence can be transmitted across generations in different forms. Adults who experience IPV can similarly trace a higher likelihood of victimization to childhood maltreatment. All four types of childhood maltreatment, physical, psychological, sexual, and neglect, have been connected to later IPV victimization as an adult. Children who have been exposed to IPV have shown higher levels of stress, depression, and internalization of blame. Children living in foster care placements have also been shown to have a higher likelihood of using IPV or experiencing IPV in adulthood. Batterer intervention programs are currently the primary intervention for IPV, and courts in most states are mandated to order BIP as part of domestic violence convictions. While this module uses the term BIPs, these programs are sometimes referred to by other names, such as intimate partner abuse education programs or intervention and prevention group therapy. BIPs are a critical element of a coordinated community response to intimate partner violence, or IPV, with a focus on offender accountability and victim/family safety. Intervention programs for people who use IPVs before the 1970s were essentially non-existent. Aside from efforts by the Psychiatric Institute of the Municipal Court of Chicago, which paired jail terms with social casework as far as 1914. Aside from this one example in Chicago, BIPs were not an intervention strategy for IPV until the 1970s. In 1977, we saw some of the first published studies on the use of programs that used a wide array of approaches which addressed family stressors such as parenting, finances, communication, and sexuality. In the 1980s, the US saw a paradigm shift in how the criminal justice system was involved in cases of IPV. In 1984, the U.S. District Court of Connecticut set a precedent in the Thurman v. City of Torrington, which law enforcement was found to be legally obligated to intervene in cases of IPV, which led to the implementation of mandated arrest statutes or laws. Additionally, district attorneys began criminally charging these cases, rather than having victims rely on civil orders for protection and remediation. Alongside of these mandated arrests, some states adopted a no-drop policy. These policies removed discretion from prosecutors to drop IPV cases, which often increased the pressure on victims to participate in criminal cases. The many changes to how communities and systems responded to IPV in the 1990s resulted in 48 states codifying the most robust victim protection laws. Part of this response was the 37 states, including Minnesota, implemented standards for BIPs and mandated participation in BIPs. Turning to the past 20 years of the development of BIPs, discourse has centered around cultural versus medicalization debate of the causes of IPV and the lack of standardization across programs. In the US, there are an estimated to be over 2,500 programs, which use a variety of theoretical orientations and structures. The most prevalent models of BIPs are Minnesota's Duluth model, or psychoeducational, and cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. IPV and child maltreatment are inextricably linked. As such, it is important for child welfare workers to understand the different intervention options for people who use IPV. Upcoming content in this module is focused on Batterer intervention programs, or BIPs. Child welfare workers can strengthen their practice with people who use IPV, including children exposed to IPV, by encouraging accountability among people who use violence through participation in evidence-informed programs, and by connecting stakeholders with resources to foster change. In cases of IPV where the legal system becomes involved, jurisdictions will mandate treatment where a person who used violence is ordered to attend a BIP. These programs are often hosted by community services, nonprofits, and for-profit agencies. BIPs are typically structured as either a closed or open group. Closed group means that groups are cohort-based, where all members start and end at the same time. Open groups are designed to allow participants to begin and leave the group on individual schedules. Group models are popular not only because they are more cost-effective than individual-based interventions, but they also provide opportunities for participants to keep each other accountable, mentor one another, share common lived experiences, and challenge harmful attitudes, cognitions, and behaviors. It is also common for BIPs to offer a set of curriculum where the program objectives and activities do not change based on the individual circumstance of each case. At times, programs will include parallel individual therapy before, after, or concurrently alongside the group. In other cases, offenders are also mandated to attend individual one-on-one therapy. However, individual one-on-one mandated therapy is not the norm. Lastly, people who experience IPV are often more closely protected in cases of IPV, and most BIP programs do not directly include victims in groups. As previously mentioned, there are two predominant models of BIPs in the US. The first and the most common is the Duluth model, which is self-described as a feminist psychoeducational group model. The Duluth model was created in 1980 by a group of domestic violence advocates in Duluth, Minnesota, and will be discussed more in the following slides. The second most common form of BIPs are cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. These programs have been described as psychodynamic group therapy. CBT originated in the 1960s and was first used for IPV in the 1980s. There are also different subtype programs under the CBT umbrella, such as moral recognition therapy, and for domestic violence, which is sometimes used as a treatment model, known as MRT-DV. While MRT and CBT are similar in many ways, the core difference between the two is that MRT focuses on moral reasoning and uses a 12-step process. In addition to the Duluth model and CBT, there are a number of other programs which blend different aspects of each model, individual therapy, and other interventions. Now I will discuss the Duluth model, which is the most commonly used model of BIPs in the US. The Duluth model views the cause of IPV as stemming from patriarchal ideology in which men control and abuse women and children within family units. The Duluth model also posits that IPV is not caused by mental or behavioral problems, but instead through male authoritarian power and control against women and children. In other words, the Duluth model views the problem as historical, systemic, and cultural. The goals of the Duluth model are to reduce recidivism of violent crime and reduce abusive and threatening behaviors, which control and dominate women and children. The Duluth model works to foster egalitarian relationships and promote equality between men and women. The structure of the Duluth model is group-based, and groups may be open or closed, depending on the program. Groups are facilitated by both a male and female facilitator, when possible, and the group content is focused on addressing mechanisms of power and control. The curriculum for the group model includes the use of multiple visual aids, or wheels, as points of discussion throughout different sessions. Examples of these wheels are shown on the slide. Perhaps the most well-known of these wheels is the power and control wheel, which is divided into 8 types of power and control that men use over women. These types of power and control include intimidation, emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, male privilege, economic abuse, and coercion and threats. Also commonly used is the equality wheel, which corresponds with the different types of power detailed in the power and control wheel. There are other wheels included in the Duluth model, and these are available on the website listed in the resource slide towards the end of this module. Using these wheels, the Duluth model works to center the voices of victim survivors in conversations and break down patriarchal sentiments. The Duluth model is recognized as an effective model by the National Institute of Justice, and it is classified as an effective model to address IPV. Researchers have found that participants of the Duluth model BIP programs were less likely to recidivate than those who did not participate, and victims were less likely to report recidivism. Participants who completed these programs were also more likely to report decreases in violent attitudes and in physical, emotional, and verbal aggression 6 months following program completion. One study with an experimental design and 404 participants found that participants who completed the group were 2.5 times less likely to be charged with any crime, but this difference lessened in a 1-year follow-up. The authors of another study also found that 9 years after completion of the Duluth model group, there was no significant difference in IPV recidivism between men who had completed the Duluth model program and those who had not. Practitioners and scholars who oppose the Duluth model have raised several critiques. Some have posited that the Duluth model has a narrowed focus of the ideology of IPV. This exclusion of substance abuse and other personal psychological problems are seen by some as notably absent. Critics have also questioned that the Duluth model's applicability towards same-sex relationships, given its focus on male to female relationships, along with how appropriate it may be to address incidents of IPV among members of various cultural groups. As noted earlier, the effects of the program have also been found to be limited, especially in terms of recidivism. However, in response to this critique, some researchers have pointed out that many programs do not strictly adhere to the Duluth model curriculum, which makes evaluating Duluth model programs a challenge. Now moving on to the second most common model for BIPs, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT for IPV is widely used, but CBT views the cause of IPV as stemming from the lived experiences of the individual. In other words, the use of violence is primarily a learned behavior. The goals of cognitive behavioral therapy are to change and replace thought processes that relate to IPV, to disrupt these cognitive processes that eventually lead to the use of violence, and to have men who use violence examine the circumstances that surround the use of violence, specifically the antecedents and consequences of violence. The structure of CBT groups has been classified as psychotherapeutic, group-based, centering around assignments or homework during and before sessions. Curriculum of CBT includes activities, assignments, and discussions that center around primarily anger management, communication skills, assertiveness, resocialization away from old learned behaviors, and towards conformity to nonviolent community norms, and learning about emotions. Most research studies, meta-analyses, and program evaluations have found that CBT had a small effect size or no effect on recidivism. In other words, participants of CBT programs were slightly less likely to reduce the use of violence compared to those who did not complete any BIP program during and immediately after the program. In post-assessments years later, the effect wore off, similar to the Duluth model. Two large-scale meta-analyses of over 28 studies found no significant effects, and the National Institute of Justice has classified CBT for anti-partner violence as ineffective and not evidence-based. Similar to critiques of the Duluth model, CBT approaches have been criticized for limited applicability in same-sex relationships and a lack of cultural relevance. Now we will compare the Duluth model to CBT BIPs. The models have differing views of the root causes of IPV, with CBT viewing the etiology of IPV primarily due to individual level characteristics, and the Duluth model viewing the etiology as socially reinforced by patriarchal ideology. Categorically, the Duluth model is often classified as psychoeducational and CBT as therapeutic, with both typically using a group therapy format. Although each model can be implemented as a standalone intervention approach, in many programs, content for each approach is included in the curriculum. Findings on the effectiveness for each program with respect to recidivism are well matched, with both programs showing small effect sizes. It is worth mentioning that BIPs are not evaluated at all, and the primary outcome for those are recidivism. Although stopping the use of violence should be the primary outcome for our BIPs, few programs examine participants' changes as they relate to attitudes toward violence, mental and behavioral health, empathy, relationship functioning, and accountability for one's actions. These components are often part of BIP curriculum, but are rarely examined as outcomes. Critics of both models have also highlighted the limitations which stemmed from the creation of all models within a Western white context. In other words, both models are often critiqued as not culturally relevant and heteronormative. The Duluth model has addressed some of these critiques and implemented adaptive curriculums to be more inclusive. Similarly, facilitators of BIPs across the country have taken steps to adapt their curricula to be more responsive to diverse backgrounds and the needs of group participants. Thus far, we have presented information on BIP interventions that utilize the Duluth model and a CBT approach. However, in reality, Many BIP programs today use a blend of two approaches and integrate other treatments, therapies, and interventions. One example is a restorative justice approach. In a restorative justice approach, the focus is on creating an opportunity for the person who used violence, the person who experienced violence when they're willing to participate, and community stakeholders to come together and have dialogue about the IPV within that specific case. Notably, this approach uses victim surrogates when an actual person who experienced IPV does not wish to participate. Within these dialogues, the core questions answered are, what happened, how are you impacted, and what can be done to make things better? Notably, the restorative justice approach seeks to empower the person who experienced the violence by providing a space to share how the incident harmed them and to suggest meaningful actions for the person who used violence. Similar to all BIPs, there are a lack of evaluation efforts devoted to examining the effectiveness of programs that incorporate restorative justice approaches. However, the authors of one study found that a restorative justice-based BIP was more effective than Duluth model only BIP in reducing recidivism up to 24 months after completion of the program. Still, much more evaluation and research needs to be done to examine recidivism and other outcomes associated with all BIPs and intervention approaches for people who use violence. Although the majority of this module is focused on batterer intervention programs, it is important to share information on other programs related to IPV and child maltreatment. We will highlight 3 programs designed for men who use violence and who are also parents. The 3 programs are Caring Dads, Strong Fathers, and Fathers for Change. Caring Dads is a 17-week group that focuses on reassessing past parenting practices, child-centered fathering, and rebuilding trust. Caring Dads has been found to be effective in several outcomes, including increasing respect towards the mother and lessening discipline over reactivity, such as corporal punishment. A program evaluation of Caring Dads showed a 66% reduction in the use of children in arguments as a controlling behavior by their father, and a 50% reduction in the use of emotional abuse in relationships. Strong Fathers uses a 20-session group format that pairs in-group lessons and at-home activities. The program prioritizes a non-white, culturally relevant approach with an African-American facilitator. In an evaluation of Strong Fathers, there was a decrease in child protection involvement, and findings highlighted an improvement in parenting skills and relationship skills. Fathers for Change is a 16 to 24-week group that uses a combination of motivational interviewing, psychoeducation, CBT, and restorative justice. Fathers for Change adapts to the individual needs within a client-centered approach. A 2022 evaluation of Fathers for Change with 204 couples found medium to large effect sizes in the reduction of the use of IPV in substance use. The program also has a dropout rate of nearly half of what is considered normal for other IPV programs, indicating that more participants completed this program compared to other BIPs. There are many BIPs offered across the state in Minnesota. We are currently undertaking evaluation of the BIPs hosted by the Domestic Abuse Project, or DAP, including groups for veterans and for males who identify as BIPOC. DAP is located in Minneapolis and was founded in 1979. DAP's mission is to build communities free from violence by providing holistic healing for every member of the family. BIPs at DAP are 24 to 36 weeks in duration. The group curricula are psychoeducational and CBT based, trauma-informed, and responsive to aspects of social and cultural diversity among participants. Across the state, BIP resources differ depending on location. On this slide, there are 9 resources which are recommended for review. The first is a relevant statute relating to domestic abuse programs. This statute details standards in which all BIPs in Minnesota must adhere to. The next resource is the legislative history, relevant acts and laws, victim safety provisions, child protection considerations, and other major features of Minnesota's laws dealing with intimate partner violence. The third resource is Minnesota's judicial branch's website, which includes FAQs, relevant forms related to the petitioning for order for protections or harassment restraining orders, and additional tools and resources through Minnesota's court system. The fourth is the link to DAIP's resource page. There are 7 learning wheels, including the power and control wheel, equality post-separation, abuse of children, nurturing children, and culture and creator wheels. The page also includes approved adaptations of the wheels and translations in different languages. The fifth resource link is to the National Institute of Justice's Crime Solutions page. Crime Solutions rates programs and practices for effectiveness, including the Duluth Model and CPT. The sixth resource was released in September 2021 and is a resource for caseworkers who help families and children navigate family violence within a multidisciplinary context. The seventh resource is a link to the website for the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare's page for resource bundles. On this page, you will find more resources related to intimate partner violence and other content. The eighth resource page is Minnesota's Day One Crisis Hotline, which is a 24/7 hotline for people experiencing IPV in Minnesota. And lastly, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is listed as a resource for free and confidential help for those experiencing intimate partner violence. Thank you for watching and listening to this module. This was the second part of a two-part series which explored the co-occurrence of intimate partner violence and child maltreatment and batterer intervention programs. After the slide, there were 3 slides of references of scholarship and research which was used to support the content of this module.